Boston.
2024. The police report described it as a gangland shootout on 4th Street, a standard power struggle between the Irish mob and the new syndicates. But the police report was wrong. It didn't mention that the target, Carson O'Connell, the most feared man in the city, was unarmed and seconds away from execution. It didn't mention that his savior wasn't a bodyguard, but a tired waitress named Sarah, who was just trying to pay her rent. And it certainly didn't mention that she didn't just panic and pull a trigger. She cleared the room with the precision of a ghost. This is the story of the woman who held the gun and the king who bowed to her. Rain battered the cracked pavement of South Boston, turning the neon sign of the Midnight Diner into a blurred, bleeding red smudge against the dark. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee lemon disinfectant and the specific kind of despair that only exists at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Carson O'Connell sat in the corner booth, the one furthest from the door and closest to the kitchen exit. It was a habit he couldn't break, not even when he was just trying to get a moment of silence. At 34, Carson was the head of the O'Connell Syndicate, an organization that controlled shipping lanes from Boston to Dublin. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than the diner's annual revenue. But tonight, he looked less like a kingpin and more like a man haunting his own life. He checked his watch. 2:03 a.m. His security detail, a massive man named Bricks, was outside in the SUV, probably smoking. Carson had sent him out. He needed 5 minutes without a shadow. Just 5 minutes to stare at a black coffee and pretend he wasn't waiting for a war to start with Donovan Cole, a rival encroaching on the south end. "Refill, honey." Carson looked up. The waitress stood there, holding a glass pot of decaf. Her name tag read, Sarah. She looks to be in her late 20s, with messy brown hair, tied back in a utilitarian bun, and shadows under her eyes that spoke of double shifts and insomnia. Her uniform was a size too big, swallowing her frame. "Black." "Keep it coming," Carson said, his voice raspy. Sarah poured the coffee with a steady hand. She didn't flirt, didn't smile, and didn't seem impressed by the expensive suit or the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. To her, he was just another insomniac in a city full of them. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice flat but not unkind. "You have no idea," Carson muttered. "Try me. I just cleaned vomit off table 4. Unless you're dealing with that, you're winning." Carson actually cracked a half smile. "No vomit, just sharks." Sarah paused, the pot hovering. She looked at him, really looked at him for a split second. Her eyes were a startling icy gray, completely at odds with her plain demeanor. For a moment, Carson felt like he was being scanned by a security camera, not a waitress. Then the moment passed. She shrugged. "Sharks bite. Careful." She turned to walk back behind the counter. The bell above the diner door jingled. It wasn't the soft jingle of a late-night drunk stumbling in for pancakes. It was the aggressive, sudden shove of a door being thrown open with purpose. Carson's instincts, honed by 15 years of street warfare, screamed. He didn't look up immediately. He looked at the reflection in the dark window next to him. 3 men. Long trench coats, despite the mild chill. Hands buried deep in pockets. They didn't look at the menu. They looked directly at the corner booth. Donovan Cole's men. Carson reached for his waistband, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Empty. He had left his piece in the glove box of the SUV, a momentary lapse of judgment born of arrogance and exhaustion. He was unarmed. Bricks wasn't coming in. If these men were here, Bricks was likely dead in the parking lot. The leader of the trio, a scarred man known on the streets as the Butcher, stepped forward. He pulled a silenced MAC-10 from his coat. The other two flanked him, drawing 9mm pistols. O'Connell, the Butcher grinned, revealing gold-capped teeth. Donovan sends his regards. Carson didn't move. There was nowhere to go. The kitchen door was 15 feet away, too far. He stared down the barrel of the suppressor, his mind racing through calculations that all ended in 0. "Do it here," Carson said, his voice steady, refusing to give them the satisfaction of fear. "Ruining a nice diner." "We like the atmosphere," the Butcher sneered. He raised the gun. Time seemed to stretch into a thick, syrupy crawl. Carson watched the Butcher's finger tighten on the trigger. He braced for the impact, the darkness. Clang! A metal coffee pot shattered against the back of the Butcher's skull. It wasn't a clumsy throw. It was a calculated, violent impact. Scalding hot coffee exploded over the Butcher's neck and back. He screamed, his aim jerking wild, as a spray of bullets tore into the ceiling tiles, raining white dust over the booth. Carson's eyes snapped to the counter. Sarah wasn't cowering. She wasn't screaming. She was vaulting over the Formica counter with a fluidity that was terrifying to witness. As the Butcher staggered, clawing at his burning skin, Sarah didn't hesitate. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. Her posture had shifted, low center of gravity, shoulders squared. She lunged at the second gunman, the one on the left. Before the man could pivot his weapon, Sarah grabbed his wrist with her left hand and drove the palm of her right hand into his chin. The sound of his jaw snapping was louder than the rain outside. As the man crumpled, dropping his Glock 17, Sarah didn't scramble for it. She caught it in midair before it hit the linoleum. It happened in less than 2 seconds. The third gunman, stunned by the sudden explosion of violence from the help, swung his weapon toward her. "Bitch!" he screamed. Sarah didn't blink. She raised the stolen Glock, her grip perfect, high and tight on the beaver tail. Pop, pop, double tap, center mass. The third gunman dropped without a sound. The Butcher, recovering from the burns, swung his MAC-10 around, eyes wild with rage. Sarah pivoted on her heel, dropping to one knee to reduce her silhouette. She fired once, a single shot between the eyes. The Butcher fell backward, crashing into the dessert display case. Silence rushed back into the diner, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sizzling of the coffee machine and the rain drumming on the roof. Carson sat frozen in his booth. He had seen professional hitmen work. He had seen military contractors operate. But he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't a waitress defending herself. This was an executioner clearing a kill box. Sarah stood up slowly. She didn't shake. She checked the chamber of the Glock, ejected the magazine to check the count, and slammed it back in. Only then did she look at Carson. "We have to go," she said. Her voice wasn't flat anymore. It was commanding. "There will be a driver, a sweep team. 3 minutes out, max." Carson stared at her. "Who are you?" She ignored the question, moving to the window and peering through the blinds. "Your man outside is dead. Throat slit. They parked a black sedan in the alley. If we stay here, we die. If the cops come, I go to prison for life because I don't exist in this country. So, Mr. O'Connell, are you coming, or are you going to sit there until the second wave hits?" Carson O'Connell, the King of Boston, stood up. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one giving the orders. "Lead the way," he said. They burst out the back door into the alleyway, the rain instantly soaking them to the bone. The air smelled of wet trash and metallic blood. Carson saw Brix's body slumped over the steering wheel of his Escalade. A surge of rage tightened his chest, but Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip like iron. "Don't look," she hissed. "Move." She bypassed Carson's SUV and headed toward a beat-up rust bucket 2015 Honda Civic parked behind the dumpster. "We're taking that?" Carson asked, incredulous. "It doesn't have GPS tracking and Donovan isn't looking for it," she snapped, unlocking the door. "Get in." Carson slid into the passenger seat, his knees pressing against the dashboard. The car smelled of vanilla air freshener and old receipts. Sarah jumped into the driver's seat, threw the Glock onto her lap and cranked the engine. It sputtered, then roared to life. She threw the car into reverse, whipping it out of the alley with a precision driver's skill, missing the brick wall by an inch. As they peeled onto 4th Street, headlights cut through the rain behind them. "Company," Carson said, looking in the side mirror. A heavy black Suburban was tearing down the street, closing the gap. "Hold on," Sarah said. She didn't panic. She shifted gears, the engine whining in protest. She took a hard right onto Dorchester Avenue, running a red light. The Suburban followed, heavy and aggressive, trying to ram their bumper. "There's a Glock in the glove box," Sarah said calmly, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "It's loaded. Safety is on the trigger." Carson opened the glove box. Inside, nestled among napkins and a tire pressure gauge, was a Glock 19. It was clean, oiled, and ready. He looked at her, his mind reeling. Waitresses didn't keep serviced firearms in their Honda Civics. "Shoot out their tires," she ordered. "I'm going to drift the next turn." Carson rolled down the window, the wind and rain whipping his face. He leaned out, aiming back at the pursuing SUV. He fired 3 shots. The windshield of the SUV starred, but it kept coming. Armored glass. "Aim lower," Sarah shouted. She ripped the handbrake. The Civic spun 180 degrees in the middle of the wet intersection, facing the oncoming SUV. "What the hell are you doing?" Carson yelled. "Buying time," she muttered. She floored the gas in reverse, spinning the car back around in a J-turn that would have made a stuntman jealous. As the SUV tried to correct its course to follow the erratic movement, it oversteered on the slick pavement. Carson fired again, low. 1, 2, 3. The front right tire of the Suburban blew. The heavy vehicle lurched violently to the right, slamming into a parked delivery truck with a deafening crunch of metal. Sarah didn't slow down. She weaved through traffic, taking a series of confusing lefts and rights until they were deep in the industrial district, far from the prying eyes of the street cameras. She pulled the car into an abandoned shipyard garage, the rusted door groaning as she manually hauled it open, and drove inside. Only when the engine was off and the darkness swallowed them did the adrenaline begin to fade. Carson sat in the dark, his breathing heavy. He looked at the woman next to him. She was leaning her head against the steering wheel, taking slow, deep breaths. Her hands finally were trembling slightly. "Okay," Carson said, breaking the silence. "We're alive. Now tell me the truth. You're not a waitress." Sarah lifted her head. In the dim light of the dashboard, she looked exhausted. "I was a waitress for 6 months. It was a good job. Good tips. Waitresses don't execute hitmen. Waitresses don't do J-turns." Carson shifted, angling his body toward her, the gun still loosely in his hand. "Who do you work for, the feds, the Russians?" Sarah laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "If I worked for the feds, you'd be in cuffs. If I worked for the Russians, you'd be dead." She turned to him. and the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My name isn't Sarah Jenkins, it's Everly. And 3 years ago I was the head of security for the Petrova family in Moscow, before they were wiped out. Carson went still. The Petrova massacre was legendary in the underworld. An entire crime family erased in one night by a coalition of rivals. No survivors were reported. You're the ghost of Moscow, Carson whispered. It was a rumor, a myth about a female bodyguard who had allegedly killed 20 men trying to save her, dawn only to vanish into the wind. I was, she corrected. Then I became Sarah. I wanted out O'Connell. I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to pour coffee and worry about rent and watch bad TV. She looked down at her hands, still stained with gun oil and coffee. But guys like Donovan Cole, they don't let people like us have quiet lives. Donovan didn't know who you were, Carson realized. He just got unlucky. He got unlucky, Everly agreed. But now he knows. The butcher was wearing a body cam. I saw the light blinking. Donovan has the footage. He knows I'm alive. And he knows I'm with you. She looked Carson in the eye. My cover is blown. My life is over. Again. Carson looked at the woman who had saved him. He saw the grief behind the steel in her eyes. She had lost everything to save a stranger. No, Carson said firmly. Your life isn't over. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a burner phone he kept for emergencies. You saved the king, Everly. That means you're under the king's protection now. I don't need your protection, she scoffed. Maybe not, Carson admitted. But you need my resources. Donovan is coming for both of us now. He wants my territory. And he wants the trophy of killing the ghost of Moscow. We are bound together. He held out his hand. Help me take Donovan down. Help me clean up this city. And when it's done, I'll give you whatever you want. Money, a new identity, a private island. Anything. Everly looked at his hand, then at his face. She saw the sincerity there. She also saw the ruthlessness. He was a dangerous man, but he was a man of his word. She sighed, a sound of resignation and resolve. She shook his hand. Her grip was calloused and strong. First, she said, we need to ditch this car, and I need a weapon that isn't a subcompact Glock. If we're going to war, O'Connell, I need a rifle. Carson smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile. I know a guy. Good, she said, starting the car again. Because I'm charging you overtime for tonight. The adrenaline from the car chase had begun to metabolize into a cold, shivering ache by the time Everly steered the battered Honda Civic into the narrow cobblestone streets of the North End. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, slicking the old brick buildings with a sheen that looked like oil. Carson watched her profile as she drove. She was scanning every alley, every parked car, her eyes moving with a restless, predatory energy. He had employed the best security contractors money could buy, ex-SAS Navy SEALs, Israeli commandos. None of them possessed the raw, organic situational awareness she displayed. They learned it in a school. She had learned it in the wild. We're going to Miller's, Carson asked, recognizing the route. If Miller is still breathing, he's the only one in this city who can scrub a ghost, Everly replied. They pulled up behind a nondescript shop with a fading gold leaf sign, Miller's Horology and Timepieces. The windows were barred, and the display case held only a few dusty pocket watches that looked like they hadn't ticked since the Cold War. Everly killed the engine. You knock. He doesn't know my face anymore. I look different. Carson stepped out the cold air, biting through his wetsuit. He approached the steel-reinforced door and rapped a specific rhythm with his signet ring. Tap, 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 pause, tap. A sliding viewport opened. A pair of watery blue eyes behind thick bifocals peered out. "Shop's closed, Mr. O'Connell. I told you parts for the Rolex are on backorder." "Open the door, Miller. I'm not here for a watch. I'm here for the heavy inventory." The locks tumbled, 3 heavy deadbolts clanking in succession. The door swung open, revealing a shop that smelled of cedar lubricant and old paper. Miller, a hunchbacked man in a tweed vest who looked like a kindly grandfather, ushered them in quickly and relocked the door. "You look like hell, Carson." Miller grunted, shuffling toward the back. "And who is the stray?" "The stray is the reason I'm not in a body bag," Carson said, walking past the counters. Everly remained silent, her eyes sweeping the room, checking the corners, the exits. Miller pressed a hidden button under the cash register. The back wall, covered in shelves of clock parts, hissed and swung inward, revealing a staircase bathed in harsh fluorescent light. They descended into the basement. It wasn't a workshop. It was a fortress. The walls were lined with pegboards holding assault rifles, submachine guns, and tactical vests. Crates of ammunition were stacked like firewood. Donovan Cole made a move, Carson said, stripping off his ruined suit jacket. "He hit me at the diner. Bricks is dead." Miller stopped polishing a lens. "Bricks. He was a good lad. Stupid, but sturdy." He looked at Carson gravely. "If Donovan hit you at the diner, he has your schedule. You have a leak, Carson, a big one." "I know." Carson said, his jaw tightening. "But right now I need to survive the night. We need a loadout. 2 vests, level 4 plates, comms, and she needs a primary." Miller looked at Everly. "What's your flavor, miss?" Everly walked to the wall, bypassing the flashy gold-plated Desert Eagles and the oversized shotguns. She reached for a Heckler and Koch 416, a compact assault rifle favored by special forces. She checked the bolt, inspected the gas block, and nodded. "HK 416, 10.4-inch barrel, suppressor, holographic sight with a magnifier." Everly said, her voice monotone. "I need 5 mags of 5.56 green tip, and a SIG P226 as a sidearm. The Glock is reliable, but I prefer the weight of the SIG." Miller raised an eyebrow at Carson. "She has taste." "She's expensive," Carson muttered. As Everly began gearing up, strapping on a tactical vest over her stained diner uniform, Carson noticed a dark stain spreading on the sleeve of her white shirt. "You're hit," Carson said, stepping forward. Everly glanced at her left arm. "It's a graze, ricochet from the diner." "Sit down," Carson ordered. He pointed to a metal workbench. "Miller, give me the med kit." "I can handle it," Everly snapped, pulling away. "You are my asset now," Carson said, his voice dropping an octave. "If infection sets in, your aim wavers. If your aim wavers, I die. Sit down." Everly hesitated, then exhaled sharply, and sat on the edge of the bench. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a jagged, angry gash where a bullet fragment had torn through the skin. It wasn't deep, but it was ugly. Carson took the antiseptic and gauze Miller handed him. He worked with surprising gentleness, cleaning the wound. For a moment, the barrier between them, the wall of boss and employee, king and bodyguard, thinned. He could smell her scent under the grime, vanilla soap and gunpowder. "You have hands like a surgeon," Everly murmured, wincing as the alcohol stung. "My father wanted me to be a doctor," Carson said, wrapping the gauze tight. "But the family business pulls you in. You don't choose this life. It chooses you. We always have a choice, Everly said quietly. I chose to leave. I walked away from Moscow. I scrubbed toilets and served burgers to escape this. Why did you intervene tonight? Carson asked, taping the bandage. You could have run out the back. You were safe. Everly looked at the wall of guns. Because I saw the butcher's eyes. He wasn't just going to kill you. He was going to kill everyone in that diner to leave no witnesses. The cook, the dishwasher, the couple in booth too. I couldn't let that happen. She looked back at him. And maybe I was tired of pretending I was someone who runs away. Carson finished the bandage. Well, you're not running tonight. He turned to Miller. We need a car, something fast but invisible. I have a grey Audi RS6 in the garage, Miller said. Stolen plates, tinted. It's a sleeper. Looks like a soccer mom car, drives like a missile. Perfect, Carson said. He grabbed a Benelli M4 shotgun for himself and racked the slide. Miller, go dark. If Donovan knows I'm alive, he'll be turning the city upside down. Don't open this door for anyone but me. Good luck, Carson, the old man said, locking the heavy steel door behind them. Back in the cool night air, the rain had stopped. Carson tossed the keys to the Audi to Everly. You drive, he said. I need to make a call. To who? Everly asked, adjusting the mirrors. You said your network is compromised. Exactly. Carson said, his eyes cold and hard as flint. I'm going to call the one person who should be panicking right now. I'm going to rattle the cage and see which rat squeals. The Audi RS6 purred through the deserted streets of the warehouse district. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tense. Carson held a fresh burner phone Miller had provided. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before it was answered. Boss? The voice was frantic. Jesus, Carson, is that you? We heard reports. The police scanner said there were bodies at the diner. We thought you were. I'm alive, Declan. Carson said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Declan Walsh, his second in command. They had grown up together in the gritty schoolyards of Southie. Declan was the brother Carson never had. Thank God, Declan breathed. Where are you? I'll send the boys. We're locking down the penthouse. We're ready for war. Don't send anyone, Carson ordered. I'm mobile. I'm going underground until I assess the damage. Who knew about the meeting at the diner, Declan? Nobody, just me and Bricks. You know I keep the books tight. Bricks is dead, Carson said. Throat cut. Christ. Declan paused. Carson, you think I told them? I don't think anything yet. But Donovan knew exactly where I was sitting. He sent the butcher. That wasn't a random hit. It was an assassination. I swear on my mother's grave, Carson, I didn't say a word. I know. Carson lied. Listen, I need you to go to the safe in the counting house. The ledger, the digital key to the offshore accounts is in there. If Donovan makes a move on our finances, he'll start there. Secure it. The counting house now, it's 3 a.m. Just do it, Declan. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Come alone. Carson hung up and crushed the phone in his hand. He stared out the window. He's the rat? Everly asked. She kept her eyes on the road, driving with one hand, the other resting near the shifter. He hesitated. Carson said, his voice hollow. Declan never hesitates. And he didn't ask about the shooters. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He just wanted to know where I was. Where are we really going? Everly asked. Because if he's the rat walking into the counting house, is a trap. It is a trap, Carson agreed. But not for us. The counting house was a front, a massive commercial laundry facility, on the edge of the harbor. During the day, it washed sheets for half the hotels in Boston. At night, it washed money. Carson directed Everly to a vantage point on a hill overlooking the facility. They killed the lights and watched. 10 minutes later, a black Range Rover pulled up to the loading dock. Declan stepped out. He was on his phone, pacing nervously. He wasn't alone. 2 other cars pulled up, vehicles Carson didn't recognize. Men with tactical gear poured out. They weren't O'Connell men. They were Donovan's crew. "He sold you out," Everly said softly. "He's bringing them to the meet to finish the job." Carson felt a part of his soul die. 15 years of friendship erased for a paycheck or a promise of power. He watched Declan shake hands with one of Donovan's lieutenants. "We can snipe him from here," Everly offered, reaching into the back for her rifle. "Clean shot, 300 meters. "No," Carson said. "Death is too easy. I need to know why. And I need to send a message to Donovan that his new pet is compromised." "So what's the play?" "We're not going into the laundry," Carson said. "We're going to burn it down. With the money inside." Everly looked at him shocked. There must be millions in cash in there. "It's not about the money anymore," Carson said, his face a mask of cold fury. "It's about showing them that I am willing to burn my own kingdom to ash before I let them take it." He turned to Everly. "Can you breach the rear gas line?" Everly smiled a sharp, dangerous expression. "I can breach anything." They moved on foot, shadows moving through the shadows. The rain had started again, masking their sound. They approached the rear of the massive industrial building, while Declan and Donovan's kill team set up an ambush inside the main warehouse floor, waiting for a boss who would never walk through the front door. Everly worked on the external pipes. She used a multi-tool to loosen the pressure valve on the main natural gas intake. The hiss of gas was lost in the sound of the rain. She rigged a simple timer using a flare and a delay fuse she had grabbed from Miller's supply. 5 minutes, she whispered into her comms earpiece. "Let's get to the roof," Carson commanded. They scaled the fire escape, moving silently across the tar paper roof until they reached the skylights overlooking the main floor. Below, Carson saw Declan standing in the center of the room, surrounded by pallets of cash and armed men. "Where is he?" Donovan's lieutenant barked. "You said he'd be here." "He's coming," Declan shouted, his voice cracking. "Carson is never late. He trusts me." Carson pulled a flashbang grenade from his vest. He looked at Everly. She nodded, holding her rifle ready. "Time to say hello," Carson said. He smashed the skylight with the butt of his shotgun and dropped the flashbang into the center of the group. Bang! The blinding white light and deafening concussive blast disoriented the men below. Before they could recover, Carson and Everly opened fire from the high ground. They didn't shoot to kill, not yet. They shot the lights. Pop, pop, pop. The warehouse plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the erratic beams of flashlights and the muzzle flashes of panicked men firing blindly at the ceiling. "Declan." Carson's voice boomed from the darkness above, amplified by the acoustics of the metal warehouse. "You chose the wrong side, brother." "Carson," Declan screamed, spinning around, waving his gun. "Carson, listen to me. They made me do it." "Gas," Everly warned. 2 minutes. "Leaving so soon?" Carson yelled. "I brought a housewarming gift." Everly fired 3 shots into the sprinkler system pipes above the pallets of money. But water didn't come out. Carson had disabled the water main valve outside. Instead, the sparks from her bullets hitting the metal pipes showered down near the gas intake she had compromised earlier. The smell of gas was now permeating the building. The smart ones among Donovan's crew smelled it. "Gas, move, move," someone shouted. The enemy team scrambled for the exits, abandoning the money, abandoning the ambush. Declan stood frozen, looking up at the broken skylight. "Run, Declan," Carson whispered, though Declan couldn't hear him. "Run and tell Donovan I'm coming." Carson and Everly rappelled down the back side of the building and sprinted toward the Audi parked a block away. They were just closing the car doors when the warehouse erupted. It wasn't a Hollywood fireball. It was a concussive humph that blew the roof off and shattered windows for 3 blocks. The night sky lit up in orange and yellow. Millions of dollars in illicit cash, the lifeblood of the O'Connell syndicate, turned into confetti and ash in seconds. Carson watched the flames reflect in the rearview mirror as Everly floored the accelerator. He didn't look back with regret. He looked back with satisfaction. "You just burned $10 million, Everly said, impressed despite herself. "I just bought my freedom," Carson corrected. "Donovan thinks I'm desperate. He thinks I'm on the run, but I just destroyed the prize he was fighting for. Now he's confused, and a confused enemy. Makes mistakes." "What now?" Everly asked. "We can't go back to the city. Every cop and crook in Boston will be looking for this car." "We need a place where nobody looks," Carson said. He rubbed his temples, the adrenaline crash hitting him. "My family has an old estate on the coast, cliffside. It's been abandoned for years. No staff, no security, but thick walls." "Cliffside," Everly repeated. "Sounds defensible." "It is," Carson said. "But we have a problem." "What?" "Declan knows about Cliffside. If he got out of that building alive, that's the first place he'll tell Donovan to look." "Then why are we going there?" Carson turned to her, his eyes dark. "Because I want them to find us. We're done running Everly. We're going to Cliffside to dig in. We're going to turn that house into a kill box. And when they come, we kill them all," Everly finished. "Exactly." Carson leaned back, closing his eyes for a second. "But first we need sleep. Even ghosts need sleep." Everly glanced at him. For the first time, she saw the weight he carried. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't just working for him. She was beginning to respect him. "Sleep while you can, boss," she said, a hint of softness in her voice. "I'll take the first watch." As the Audi sped toward the dark coastline, the distance between the waitress and the mob boss had vanished. They were soldiers now, united by fire and blood, driving headlong into the final stand. Cliffside wasn't just a house. It was a monument to isolation. Perched on a jagged promontory overlooking the Atlantic, the estate was a sprawling, brutalist structure of concrete and glass grey, as the ocean churning 300 feet below. It had been built by Carson's grandfather, a man who feared assassination more than God. And it showed in the architecture narrow choke points, reinforced walls, and a single winding road leading up to the heavy iron gates. The Audi RS6 crunched over the gravel driveway as the first grey light of dawn began to bleed through the heavy cloud cover. Everly killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the distant rhythmic roar of the waves crashing against the cliffs. "It looks like a fortress," Everly noted, scanning the perimeter. "But glass is a liability." "Bulletproof," Carson corrected, stepping out of the car. The wind whipped his coat around his legs. 2 inches of polycarbonate laminate. You'd need a .50 caliber round to crack the view. They unloaded the gear in silence, the rifles, the ammunition crates, the medical supplies. Inside the house was a time capsule. White sheets covered the furniture like shrouds. The air was cold and smelled of dust and sea salt. It was a place where happiness had gone to die a long time ago. "We have 12 hours, maybe less," Carson said, dropping a crate of ammo on a mahogany dining table. "Declan knows the layout, but he doesn't know the modifications I made after my father died." "Modifications?" Everly asked, stripping off her tactical vest to stretch her aching back. "The panic room is standard, but I installed remote-operated shutters on the ground floor and pressure sensors in the hallway. If we can funnel them into the main atrium, we control the verticality." Everly nodded, her eyes assessing the grand staircase. "The high ground creates a fatal funnel. If they breach the front doors, they're fish in a barrel, but if they flank us from the terrace, we mine the terrace," Carson said grimly. "I have C4 in the basement vault." For the next 6 hours, they didn't speak as lovers or friends. They worked as soldiers. They turned the luxury estate into a slaughterhouse. They moved heavy oak armoires to block side corridors. They rigged tripwires with flashbangs in the kitchen. They set up firing positions on the mezzanine balcony, laying out magazines in neat rows. By late afternoon, the adrenaline finally crashed. The preparations were done. All that was left was the waiting. Carson found Everly in the kitchen. She had found a dusty bottle of Pinot Noir from 1998 and was drinking it out of a chipped mug she'd found in a cupboard. She was staring out the window at the darkening sea. "You should sleep," Carson said, leaning against the doorframe. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the top sleeves, rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and covered in faint scars. "I can't," Everly whispered. "The silence is too loud." Carson walked over and poured himself a glass. He stood next to her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her body. The tension that had been simmering between them since the diner, the shared danger, the violence, the reliance on one another, was beginning to boil over. "Tell me about Moscow," Carson said softly. "The real story." Everly swirled the wine. "There is no story. Just a girl who was good at hurting people, who tried to save a family that was already doomed. I lost everyone, Carson. My sister, my friends. I came to Boston to be invisible. To be Sarah." She turned to him, her gray eyes searching his face. "And then you walked into my diner." "I'm sorry," Carson said. And he meant it. "I dragged you back into hell. No?" Everly shook her head. She reached out her hand, hovering before touching a bruise on his jawline. "You reminded me that I'm still alive. Sarah was a ghost. Everly is awake." The touch was electric. Carson caught her hand, pressing his palm against hers. His thumb traced the rough calluses on her fingers, arcs of a shooter, a fighter. "I can't promise we survive tonight," Carson said, his voice rough. "Donovan is bringing an army. Declan knows my strategies. The odds are—" "I don't care about the odds," Everly interrupted. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, looking up at him with a fierceness that took his breath away. "We have tonight. We have right now. The rest is just noise." Carson didn't hesitate. He pulled her in his hand, tangling in her messy hair, and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fueled by the proximity of death and the raw, magnetic pull between two predators who had finally found their equal. Everly responded, with equal force, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was no Donovan, no traitorous Declan, no looming siege. There was just the taste of wine, the warmth of skin, and the desperate need to feel something other than fear. They moved to the living room, collapsing onto the dust-sheeted sofa. The intimacy was frantic, a claiming of life in the face of death. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the house in long, bruised shadows. Carson rested his forehead against hers. "If we get out of this," he murmured, "I'm not letting you go back to pouring coffee." Everly smiled, a small, genuine thing. "We'll see. I'm a very expensive bodyguard." Suddenly, a chime echoed through the house. It wasn't the doorbell. It was the perimeter alarm. Carson stiffened, the lover vanishing, the dawn returning instantly. He checked his watch. They're early. Everly was already moving, grabbing her rifle from the coffee table. She checked the sight, her face hardening into the mask of the ghost. "How many?" she asked. Carson pulled up the security feed on a tablet. The grainy black and white footage showed a convoy of SUVs winding up the cliff road. No headlights. They were coming in dark. 6 vehicles, Carson counted. 25 men, maybe 30. Heavy gear. He looked at Everly. "Ready." She racked the charging handle of her HK-416. "Let them come." The storm had returned with a vengeance. Rain lashed against the armored glass of the atrium, distorting the world outside into a smear of black and grey. Inside the house was dark, save for the faint green glow of the security monitors in the kitchen, where Carson had set up a command post. "They're splitting up," Carson whispered into his comms earpiece. He was positioned on the east wing balcony, looking down at the grand entrance. Alpha Team at the front door, Bravo Team circling to the terrace. "I have." "Bravo." Everly's voice came back, calm and distorted by the radio. She was in the shadows of the West Wing, perched on top of a bookshelf that gave her a sight line to the terrace doors. "Do not engage until they breach. Let them get comfortable." Outside, the enemy moved with professional efficiency. These weren't street thugs. These were mercenaries hired by Donovan Cole. They moved in stacks, checking corners. On the security feed, Carson saw a figure approach the massive oak front doors. He zoomed in. It was Declan. Declan looked terrified. He was wearing a bulletproof vest that looked 2 sizes too big. A large man, Donovan's head of enforcement, a brute named Carver, was shoving him forward. "Open it, Declan." Carver's voice boomed, barely audible through the glass. "You have the code." Carson felt a cold knot in his stomach. He raised his Benelli shotgun, resting the barrel on the marble railing. Declan punched a code into the keypad. The heavy locks disengaged with a mechanical thud. The doors swung open. "Breach front," Carson signaled. Carver kicked the door wide and tossed in a flashbang. Bang! The white light filled the foyer. Smoke billowed. "Clear, move up." Carver shouted. 10 men swarmed into the foyer, their boots thudding on the marble. They fanned out, weapons raised, scanning the dark upper levels. "Declan, get to the front," Carver yelled. "Call him out." Declan stumbled into the center of the room. "Carson," he screamed, his voice breaking. "Carson, please, they have my wife. They have Marie. I had to do it." Carson froze. Marie? Declan's wife. She was innocent. This wasn't just greed. It was leverage. "Don't listen." Everly's voice cut through his earpiece. "It's a distraction. Look at the shadows, Carson. They're setting up a suppressed LMG behind the fountain." Carson shifted his aim. Everly was right. While Declan wept in the center of the room, a gunner was setting up a machine gun in the shadows, aiming directly at the balcony where Carson was hiding. "I see him," Carson whispered. "On my mark." "Wait," Everly said. Bravo team is placing charges on the terrace glass. If they blow it, the pressure change will shatter the other windows. We can't wait. Take the shot. 3, 2, 1. Everly didn't fire at the men on the terrace. She fired at the C4 charge they were adhering to the glass. Crack! The single rifle round passed through the glass and struck the explosive. The detonation was deafening. The entire terrace wall blew outward, not inward, taking 3 of the Bravo team mercenaries with it into the stormy night. The blast shook the house to its foundations. In the foyer, the distraction worked. The Alpha team looked toward the explosion. "Now," Carson yelled. He stood up and unleashed the Benelli. The shotgun roared buckshot, tearing into the mercenaries below. The man setting up the machine gun dropped instantly. Chaos erupted. The mercenaries scrambled for cover behind the marble pillars, returning fire. Bullets chipped away at the balustrade, sending stone fragments flying into Carson's face. "Suppressing fire," Carver screamed. "Get up those stairs." Carson ducked low, reloading with practiced speed. "Everly status. I'm shifting position," she replied, breathless. "They're coming through the blown terrace. I have 4 hostiles in the library. Hold them back. Don't let them flank us." Carson popped up again, firing twice. He hit a mercenary trying to sprint for the stairs. The man tumbled backward. But there were too many of them. The sheer volume of fire was pinning Carson down. He couldn't move. He heard boots pounding up the stairs on the opposite side. "They're on the west stairs," Carson shouted. "I can't get a line of sight," Everly yelled. "I'm pinned in the library." Carson realized he was about to be overrun. He pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade. "Declan," Carson roared over the gunfire. "Get down." Declan, still cowering on the floor, curled into a ball. Carson threw the grenade at the base of the stairs. The explosion sent a shockwave through the floor. Screams followed. But through the smoke, a figure emerged. It was Carver. He was massive, wearing heavy body armor that absorbed the shrapnel. He raised an assault rifle and fired a burst at Carson. Carson dove, but he wasn't fast enough. A round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, his shotgun sliding away. "Carson!" Everly screamed in his ear. Carver reached the top of the stairs, grinning. He walked toward Carson, leveling his rifle. "End of the line, King," Carver sneered. Carson scrambled backward, reaching for his sidearm, but his arm was numb. He looked up at the barrel of the gun. Suddenly, a red mist exploded from the side of Carver's head. Carver didn't fall immediately. He stood there confused before his knees buckled, and he collapsed forward, dead before he hit the floor. Carson looked across the atrium. Everly was swinging from the chandelier. She had tied a rappelling line to the upper gallery and swung across the open space, firing her pistol mid-air with impossible accuracy. She landed on the balcony next to Carson, rolling to absorb the impact, and immediately raised her rifle to cover the stairs. "You're crazy," Carson gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "I'm efficient," she snapped. She grabbed him by his vest and hauled him up. "Can you move?" "Yeah." Carson gritted his teeth. "Shoulders wrecked, but I can walk." "We lost the ground floor," Everly said, firing 2 shots to keep the remaining mercenaries' heads down. "We need to fall back to the master suite. It's the only room with a reinforced door." "Declan is still down there," Carson said, looking over the railing. Declan was crawling through the debris, trying to reach the exit. "Leave him," Everly said. "He made his choice." "No," Carson said. "He's baked. Look." Donovan Cole himself had just walked through the front door. He was flanked by 2 elite bodyguards. He stepped over the bodies of his own men, unbothered by the carnage. He grabbed Declan by the collar and hauled him up. Donovan looked up at the balcony, locking eyes with Carson. He held a gun to Declan's head. "O'Connell!" Donovan shouted, his voice smooth and cultured. "Impressive show. But the game is over. Come down and surrender, and I'll let your little girlfriend live. Stay up there, and I paint the walls with your best friend's brains." Carson stared down at the scene. He was bleeding. He was outnumbered. And the man holding the gun to his brother's head was the devil he had been fighting for years. "He's lying," Everly whispered. "He kills us all." "I know," Carson said. He looked at Everly. "Do you trust me?" "With my life," she said without hesitation. "Good," Carson said. He tapped his earpiece. "Because I'm about to blow the roof." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a detonator. "What roof?" Everly asked, eyes whitening. "The skylight," Carson said. "The one directly above them." He pressed the button. The detonator clicked. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but an avalanche of gravity. The structural beams groaned once before the massive reinforced glass dome, tons of steel and glazing, surrendered to the storm. With a sound like the sky itself collapsing, the roof came down. Shards the size of guillotines rained into the atrium, followed by twisted steel and the deluge of freezing rain. The screams of Donovan's mercenaries were cut short, silenced by the crushing weight of the falling architecture. On the balcony, the shockwave threw Carson and Everly against the wall, the air instantly replaced by howling wind and dust. "Move," Everly coughed, hauling Carson up. "Before the dust settles." They scrambled down the side staircase, the only structure miraculously intact. Below the atrium was a graveyard of jagged debris and water. But in the center, protected by the mezzanine overhang, a figure stirred. Donovan Cole pulled himself from the rubble, his suit shredded and face bloodied but alive. Next to him, Declan was curled in a fetal position, miraculously shielding his head. Donovan saw Carson and Everly descending. He didn't look like a sophisticated mob boss anymore. He looked like a cornered rat. He raised a snub-nosed revolver. "You destroyed your own house," Donovan screamed, his voice cracking. Carson stepped over the debris, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Everly stepped in front of him, raising her rifle. Click. Empty. She drew her sidearm, but she was a fraction too slow. Donovan fired. The bullet struck Everly in the thigh. She cried out, her leg buckling as she collapsed into the wet debris, her gun sliding out of reach. "Everly," Carson roared, dropping to his knees. "Kill him." She gritted out, clutching the wound. Donovan laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. He adjusted his aim toward Carson's chest. "Romeo and Juliet. How touching. I'm going to enjoy this." He cocked the hammer. Carson stared down the barrel 15 feet away. He was unarmed, injured, and out of time. "Do it," Carson spat. "But know that I'll haunt you from hell." "You're already there," Donovan sneered. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then the coward moved. Declan, the man who had wept on the floor, launched himself at Donovan. It was a tackle born of pure desperation. "Run, Carson! Get off me!" Donovan roared, smashing the revolver into Declan's skull. Once, twice, Declan's grip loosened, blood pouring from his head, but he refused to let go. He looked up at Carson, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "Take care of Marie," Declan choked out. Donovan shoved the barrel into Declan's stomach and fired. Bang! Declan's body jerked, then went limp. The sound snapped something inside Carson. The pain in his shoulder vanished, replaced by a cold, white-hot fury. As Donovan tried to shove the body off, Carson crossed the distance in 2 strides. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the throat. He tackled Donovan into the water, and Glass, the revolver, flying into the darkness. They rolled in the debris, 2 kings fighting like dogs in the mud. Donovan was heavy, but Carson was possessed. He ignored the glass, slicing his knees. He punched Donovan, shattering his nose cartilage. Carson grabbed a shard of the skylight, a piece of thick, jagged glass, as long as a knife, floating in the water. Donovan looked up, eyes widening. "Carson, wait. Half the city, I'll give you half. You took my brother," Carson whispered. He drove the glass shard down. It was over in seconds. Donovan Cole died gasping in the ruin of another man's house. Carson fell back, chest heaving. The adrenaline abandoned him, leaving him hollow. He crawled to Everly, who was dragging herself toward him, leaving a trail of blood on the white marble. "Sirens," she whispered, her skin pale. "We have to go." Above the wind, the wail of approaching police cars cut through the night. Carson nodded, pulling Everly up. Limping, bleeding, and broken, they moved past the bodies. Carson paused for only a second, by Declan reaching down to close his friend's eyes. "I promise," Carson whispered. They descended into the sub-basement tunnel just as the SWAT team breached the main hall. Carson fired up the hidden speedboat, the bay doors opening to the churning Atlantic. As they sped into the stormy darkness, Carson looked back one last time. The O'Connell syndicate was ashes. His reputation was dead. He took Everly's hand. She squeezed back, watching him with tired, trusting eyes. "Where to?" she asked. "Somewhere nobody knows our names," Carson said, steering toward the open sea. Just Carson and Everly. 6 months later, the sun set over the Amalfi coast, turning the Tyrrhenian Sea into liquid gold. The air smelled of lemons, a sharp contrast to the metallic scent of blood that still haunted Carson's nightmares. He sat on the terrace of a small whitewashed villa. Everly walked out, looking different. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by a tan and a simple white sundress. She placed a basket of oranges on the table and handed him an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, Marie Declan's wife, sitting in a park with a smile on her face. On the back, in his old accountant's handwriting, "The trust is active." Carson exhaled, the final weight lifting off his chest. "And the business?" Everly asked, sitting on the railing. "Filled by new gangs. They say I died in the explosion. They say you were a ghost." Everly laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I prefer Waitress of the Year." Carson stood and wrapped his arms around her. The violence of their past felt like a different lifetime. Yet it was the forge that had hammered them together. "We need to go into town," Carson said, kissing her forehead. "I promised I'd fix the trellis for the neighbor." "Carson O'Connell handyman," she teased. "The underworld wouldn't believe it." "Let them believe what they want," Carson said, looking out at the peaceful horizon. "The king is dead. Long live the handyman." Everly smiled, kissing him softly. "And the waitress." They stood together as the sun dipped below the water, 2 survivors who had walked through the fire and found the only thing worth fighting for on the other side. Peace, and that is how a late-night shift at a diner turned into a war for the soul of Boston. Carson and Everly proved that sometimes the person pouring your coffee is the only one who can save your life, and that even in the darkest underworld, loyalty and love can survive the fire. They lost their empires, but they found their freedom. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of action, betrayal, and romance, and want to hear more stories about underdogs who become legends, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.